The corner of 7th Street and Maple did not belong to the city. On paper, it existed like any other intersection: coordinates, zoning codes, a line in the municipal budget. But paper had never been good at capturing places where things actually happened. On the street, the corner lived by a different set of rules, older and quieter, written in glances and pauses rather than ink. By day, it was unremarkable. A burned-out laundromat with boarded windows. A liquor store that never replaced its broken sign. An alley that smelled like oil and old rain. People passed through without slowing down, eyes forward, minds elsewhere. By night, it became a checkpoint. At precisely 6:40 p.m. A metal cart emerged from the alley behind the laundromat. Its wheels squeaked softly, the sound swallowed by traffic and distant sirens. The woman pushing it moved with practiced ease, as if the route had been carved into her muscles long ago. She parked the cart at the corner and locked its wheels. The sign bolted to the front was faded but legible: Sunflower Seeds. $1. Miss June sat behind it on a folding chair that had lost most of its padding years earlier. She wore a green jacket, black sneakers, a Dodgers cap pulled low, and dark glasses that reflected the street instead of revealing her eyes. Plastic bags filled with sunflower seeds hung from hooks like offerings. She did not announce herself. She did not have to. The neighborhood noticed immediately. As evening settled in, the rhythm of the street shifted. Cars idled longer before pulling away. Conversations lowered by a half step. People adjusted their routes instinctively, the way animals adjusted to unseen boundaries. Miss June watched without appearing to. Her head stayed still. Her hands worked steadily, scooping seeds into small plastic bags, tying them off with neat, economical motions. But nothing on the street escaped her awareness. She saw who arrived too early, who stayed too long, who carried themselves like they had something to lose. She remembered faces. Faces mattered more than names. There was a language to the corner, and Miss June was fluent. If she did not look up, the night moved forward. If she slowly shifted seeds from one hand to the other, something had changed: an unfamiliar presence, a miscalculation, a risk that had not been cleared. If she closed her thermos, the sound sharp and final, the corner shut down. No discussion. No exceptions. Nobody had ever explained these rules. They were not taught or enforced. They were absorbed, the way gravity was absorbed. People learned quickly what happened when they ignored them. The corner had a memory. Tony Blake arrived just before 8. His car was clean. Too clean. The kind of clean that did not belong to the neighborhood. Out-of-state plates, recently washed, carefully parked half a block away. Tony noticed the cart immediately. He noticed the way pedestrians gave it space, the way nobody brushed past it accidentally. He clocked Miss June as an old woman selling snacks, filed her under background noise, and moved on. He had learned long ago not to believe in street legends. Legends distracted people. Legends got people sloppy. Chicago had taught him to trust only systems that could be measured: money, timing, leverage. He walked past the cart without slowing. Miss June did not lift her head. That alone would have been enough warning for someone who understood the corner. Tony did not. The exchange happened fast, near a parked sedan with dark windows. A practice motion, barely noticeable to anyone not looking for it. Tony passed the package. The other man passed an envelope. They separated immediately, dissolving into opposite directions, like nothing had occurred. Tony turned back toward his car. That was when Miss June looked up. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. It was not a challenge or a threat. It was an acknowledgement, calm, deliberate, and complete. She smiled, just slightly, as if confirming a decision already made. Then she reached for her thermos and snapped it shut. The sound did not carry far. It did not need to. Sirens cut through the street less than a minute later. They came from both ends of the block, converging with precision that left no room for escape. Red and blue light bounced off windows, puddles, windshields. Tony ran on instinct, swearing as his car refused to start, panic blooming too late to be useful. Hands forced him down. Asphalt scraped his cheek. Cold metal locked around his wrists. As he was pulled upright, he looked back toward the corner. Miss June was already working again, pouring seeds into a fresh bag, her movements steady and unhurried. To anyone watching, she looked like she had never stopped. The coroner exhaled. Detective Marcus Hale read the arrest report the next morning with the same careful attention he gave to autopsy photos. The timing bothered him. The precision. He had seen plenty of lucky busts in his career, but luck rarely lined up so neatly. Patterns, on the other hand, loved repetition. Hale had been working this district long enough to recognize silence when he heard it. And there was something unusually quiet about the space around 7th and Maple in the paperwork. No complaints, no noise calls, no lingering investigations. Just arrests. Clean ones. That night, Hale drove past the corner without stopping. Miss June was there. Of course she was. He returned again the following night, and the one after that. He did not intervene. Did not question. He watched the way the street adjusted itself around the cart, the way deals formed and dissolved based on movements so subtle they barely registered. It was not chaos. It was regulation. Miss June was not preventing crime. She was shaping it, pruning it back where it grew too wild, letting it exist where it stayed small and contained. The city called it negligence. The street called it survival. When Miss June closed her cart for the night, she did it the same way every time. Wheels locked. Chain wrapped. One last look down the block. She walked home alone, past buildings that remembered worse nights than this one. Inside her apartment, the noise of the street fell away. The corkboard on her wall held names instead of photos. Some were crossed out. Some were circled. Some waited. She moved one pin. The coroner would remember. Detective Marcus Hale had learned long ago that cities lied best in the margins. Not in the headlines or press conferences, but in the quiet spaces between reports. In the patterns that did not quite qualify as evidence. In places where things worked too smoothly for too long. 7th Street and Maple was one of those places. On paper, it was unremarkable. No spikes in violent crime. No active gang wars. No community complaints loud enough to demand attention. For a neighborhood that sat between two known trafficking corridors, that alone made it suspicious. Hale parked across the street and watched. Miss June was already there, her cart planted at the corner like it had grown out of the concrete. The same faded sign. The same folding chair. The same steady rhythm of her hands as she portioned seeds into plastic bags. Nothing about her suggested authority. And yet the street behaved differently around her. People adjusted their pace without realizing it. Cars hesitated, then moved on. Deals formed and dissolved like weather patterns responding to pressure changes no one consciously tracked. Hale stayed in his car for nearly an hour, cataloging movement. Who approached the corner? Who stopped short? Who turned away when Miss June's hand slowed, when her posture shifted almost imperceptibly? He did not see her speak to anyone. He did not see her use a phone. Still, the street responded. Over the next week, Hale returned every night. He started recognizing faces. Small time dealers. Runners. Lookouts. People who existed just below the threshold of attention. None of them lingered when Miss June closed her thermos for the night. The sound, soft, contained, carried weight. When it happened, activity drained from the block in minutes, like water finding a lower level. Hale began to understand the shape of it. Miss June was not a warning system. She was a timing mechanism. Across town, Tony Blake waited. Jail had a way of compressing time into something thick and useless. He'd spent enough nights behind bars to know the rhythm. How quickly stories calcified into facts. How fast reputations formed. By the time he made bail, his name had already become shorthand. Careless. Out of town. Did not listen. Tony did not argue with that assessment. He simply adjusted. What bothered him was not the arrest. It was the efficiency of it. The feeling that he had not been caught by law enforcement so much as processed by something else first. He replayed the moment again and again. The smile. The thermos. The way the street had turned against him instantly, without hesitation. Tony understood systems too. And systems, once identified, could be disrupted. Miss June felt the change before she saw it. The street always told her first. A hesitation where there should not have been one. A runner who checked the corner twice instead of once. A deal that dissolved for reasons no one could articulate. Pressure was building. Not from law enforcement. From ego. She adjusted her routine slightly, closed earlier one night, later the next. Watched how the street compensated. It always did. Until it did not. The black SUV appeared on a Thursday. Not parked at the usual distance. Too close. Windows dark, engine idling. The men inside were not buying or selling. They were watching. Miss June clocked them immediately. So did Hale. He felt the tension ripple outward, subtle but unmistakable. Conversation shortened. Foot traffic thinned. Deals paused mid-formation. People waiting for a signal that did not come. Miss June did not touch the thermos. She stood. The effect was immediate. The corner emptied with practiced efficiency. No panic. No rush. Just withdrawal. The SUV lingered another 30 seconds, then pulled away. The street breathed again. Hale understood then that whatever balance existed here was fragile, and that someone had just tested it. Tony Blake watched from a distance. He'd paid for information. Not names, not addresses, patterns. Times. Habits. Miss June's cart fascinated him. She did not collect money beyond her seeds. She did not meet anyone privately. She did not appear to profit in any measurable way from her influence. Which meant her leverage was not transactional. That made her dangerous. Tony did not plan revenge. Revenge was emotional and efficient. He planned correction. Removal of a variable that distorted the system. The corner did not need a grandmother. It needed predictability. Hale dug into Miss June's past quietly. There was not much to find. No criminal record. No known associates. A handful of addresses over 40 years, all within the same few miles. Hospital employment records. Night shifts. ER intake. One personal tragedy, buried deep enough to avoid becoming a headline. A son. A shooting. No arrest. Hale understood then that Miss June was not reacting to crime. She was responding to absence. The next disruption came on a Friday. Louder. Sloppier. A deal went bad 2 blocks down. Raised voices. A shove. A gun flashed, then disappeared. Miss June did not intervene. She closed her thermos. The street froze. Sirens followed, distant but inevitable. By the time police arrived, everyone involved was gone except for the blood on the pavement and the shell casing no one would ever claim. That night, Miss June crossed out a name on the corkboard in her apartment. Not the shooter. The one who had pushed too far. Hale stood at his window and looked out at the city. He understood now that Miss June's corner was not safe. It was contained. And containment always failed eventually, either from pressure inside or force from outside. Tony Blake represented the latter. Hale represented the former, and Miss June stood between them, holding a line the city had long since abandoned. On Sunday night, Tony Blake walked openly towards 7th and Maple. No deal. No product. No hurry. Miss June watched him approach. This time, she did not look away. The street went quiet. Tony Blake did not rush. That alone unsettled the corner. People who came to 7th and Maple usually moved with purpose. Quick glances, fast hands, exits planned before arrival. Tony walked like he had nowhere else to be. Like time was something he could afford to waste. Miss June watched him approach without changing her posture. The street noticed. A runner paused mid-step. A car that should have stopped kept rolling. Someone across the street pretended to check their phone for too long. Tony stopped a few feet from the cart. He did not look at the sign. Did not reach for his wallet. Did not speak. He simply stood there, existing where business was usually conducted and concluded in seconds. Miss June held his gaze. For the first time in years, the corner waited. Tony's presence was not a threat in the traditional sense. He did not carry himself like a man about to do something reckless. There was no visible weapon, no entourage hovering nearby. What made him dangerous was patience. Patience disrupted rhythm. The street relied on predictability, on people behaving the way they always had. Tony was an unknown variable with too much time and too little fear. Miss June felt it settle into her bones. She did not close the thermos. She did not stand. She let the moment stretch. Across the street, Detective Hale watched from his car. He'd seen confrontations escalate in a dozen different ways over the years. Loud ones ended fast. Quiet ones lingered and poisoned everything around them. This was the second kind. Hale noted the absence of signals. No thermos. No shifting seeds. No closure. Miss June was choosing not to act, and that choice carried risk. Systems survived on consistency. Break that, and people tested limits. Tony reached into his jacket slowly and pulled out a dollar bill. He placed it on the cart. The gesture was deliberate, almost respectful. Miss June did not move to take it. The dollar lay there between them, fluttering slightly in the evening air. A challenge, wrapped in courtesy. Tony waited another beat, then turned and walked away. The street exhaled, but the sound was uneven. Miss June picked up the bill and placed it in a tin beneath the cart. Her hands trembled slightly. That night, the corner did not settle back into its usual pattern. Deals happened too close together. People lingered longer than they should have. A few faces appeared that Miss June did not recognize, and worse, did not care to recognize. Tony Blake had done what he came to do. He had introduced doubt. The next few nights confirmed it. Miss June's signal still worked, but not with the same certainty. A runner hesitated before backing off. A dealer pushed a conversation a few seconds longer after the thermos closed. Small things, barely noticeable, but cumulative. Hale saw it too. Containment was leaking. He debated stepping in. One report, one push up the chain, and the corner would be flooded with uniforms and patrol cars. The system would collapse, replaced by something louder and far less precise. He did not act. Not yet. Tony did not return immediately. He let the corner adjust to the idea of him. Instead, he moved through the neighborhood quietly, introducing himself without ever giving a name. Buying drinks? Asking questions that sounded harmless. Listening more than he spoke. People talked. They always did. What Tony learned confirmed his suspicion. Miss June was not feared because she was powerful. She was feared because she was reliable. Reliability could be undermined. Miss June sensed the shift before it became visible. She began closing earlier, then later. Changed nothing else. The street responded inconsistently. That worried her. At home, she stood in front of the corkboard longer than usual. She traced lines between names that had never needed to connect before. Some were crossed out because they'd been removed, arrested, killed, scared straight. Others were circled because they were necessary. One name had no mark at all. Tony Blake. She added a pin. The mistake happened on a Tuesday. It started small. A low-level deal 2 blocks down escalated into an argument. Voices rose. Someone shoved. A gun appeared where one had not before. Miss June noticed late. She closed the thermos. Too late. The shot echoed sharp and final, tearing through the illusion of order. People scattered. A body hit the pavement. Blood pooled where shadows usually were. Sirens came, messy and overlapping. This time, there was no clean exit. Hale arrived before the body was cold. The shooter was gone. The victim was young. Too young to have mattered to anyone with influence. The kind of death that slipped between reports and statistics. Hale stood on the edge of the scene and looked toward the corner. Miss June's cart was gone. For the first time since he'd known the street, the corner was empty. The next night, the cart returned. But something had changed. People noticed immediately. The hesitation was louder now. Deals formed and collapsed without resolution. Arguments flared over nothing. Tony Blake watched from a distance. The system was cracking. He smiled. Miss June felt older than she had in years. She knew the corner could not be restored to what it had been. Not fully. Trust, once fractured, never returned whole. She considered leaving. The thought passed quickly. She had never been here for the corner. The corner had been here for her. Hale made his decision that night. He parked across from the cart and watched until midnight. He did not intervene when he could have. He did not call for backup when it would have been easy. He understood now that Miss June's system, flawed as it was, had saved lives, had reduced chaos to something manageable. But systems built around a single person always failed the same way. They ended with that person. Tony returned to the corner just before closing. Miss June saw him coming. This time she stood. Not as a signal. As a choice. Tony stopped in front of the cart again. The space between them felt heavier now, weighted by consequences. Miss June reached beneath the cart and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photograph. She placed it on the cart. Tony looked down. A younger man. Similar eyes. Similar posture. A street corner in the background. Tony understood. Not sympathy. Not fear. Context. Miss June closed the thermos. Not for the street. For him. The photograph stayed on the cart longer than it needed to. Tony Blake did not touch it. He did not have to. The meaning had already settled in. The resemblance was unmistakable, not identical, but close enough to be deliberate. Same set of the shoulders. Same way the body leaned forward, as if always moving towards something just out of reach. Miss June watched Tony absorb it. She had not brought the photo as a threat. She had not brought it as an appeal to mercy. She had brought it as truth, stripped of explanation. The street respected truth, even when it did not forgive it. Tony nodded once. Then he stepped back. The corner did not relax. Something fundamental had shifted. The rules were still visible, but no longer absolute. People noticed the pause, the hesitation, the sense that permission was no longer guaranteed. Miss June packed up earlier than usual that night. The cart rolled into the alley without ceremony. Word spread quickly when systems weakened. By the end of the week, new faces appeared. Younger. Louder. Less patient. They did not understand the old rhythms, and did not care to learn them. They treated the corner like an opportunity instead of a boundary. Arguments lingered. Deals stretched. Guns appeared where they had not before. Miss June's signal still worked, for some. Not for all. Detective Hale watched the transformation with a growing sense of inevitability. He filed reports that went nowhere. He flagged names that disappeared into backlog. He requested additional patrols that were rerouted before they arrived. The city responded the way it always did, slowly, noisily, and too late. Hale understood now that Miss June had been compensating for institutional failure. Not fixing it, covering for it. Holding a line that no one else wanted to stand on. That line was breaking. Tony Blake moved decisively. He did not flood the corner. That would draw attention. Instead, he redirected traffic, quietly shifting deals to adjacent blocks, encouraging competition where there had been equilibrium. The pressure increased without a clear source. Violence followed. Not spectacular violence. The small kind. The kind that accumulated. A beating in an alley. A gun pulled and put away too late. A body found without witnesses. Miss June marked each incident on her corkboard. The board filled faster than it ever had. The night it finally collapsed, rain soaked the city until the streets reflected everything back at itself. Miss June returned to the corner despite the weather. She did not bring the card. She stood alone. The absence was louder than any signal she had ever used. The street did not know what to do with it. Tony arrived after midnight. He had not planned on seeing her again. He had assumed the corner would simply stop resisting. That it would fade into something unremarkable and brutal, like every other ungoverned space. Seeing her there, unarmed, unhidden, felt like an accusation. Miss June did not look at him. She looked at the corner. This was where her son had fallen. Where she had decided, years later, that absence could be filled with structure. That order, even an unofficial one, was better than indifference. She had been right. And she had been wrong. Hale arrived moments later. No backup. No sirens. Just a man stepping out of a car, rain soaking through his coat. The three of them occupied the corner without speaking, each aware that the moment had narrowed to something irreducible. Miss June understood then that the system could not be saved. Not by her. Not by Hale. Not even by Tony. Systems ended when their purpose was fulfilled, or when the cost of maintaining them exceeded the damage they prevented. She had reached that point. The gunshot echoed louder in the rain than it should have. Tony staggered, surprise flickering across his face before pain replaced it. He collapsed near the curb, blood mixing with rainwater, washing toward the gutter. Miss June lowered the gun slowly. Her hands were steady. She had always known how this would end. Hale did not draw his weapon. He did not shout. He stood still and watched the corner absorb what had happened. Sirens approached from a distance, uneven and delayed. Miss June placed the gun on the ground and stepped back. She sat on the curb beside Tony as the rain fell harder, as if the city were trying to erase the moment before it could settle. When the police arrived, the story was simple. An altercation. A self-defense claim. A witness who saw enough and not too much. The corner was sealed off, photographed, documented. By morning, it was just another crime scene. Miss June's apartment was empty when they went to look for it. The corkboard was gone. So was the card. The alley behind the laundromat smelled like rust and rain. Weeks later, Hale drove past 7th and Maple. There was no cart. No sign. The corner was louder now. Messier. Less controlled. More honest. Hale did not slow down. The city moved on the way cities always did, without pausing long enough to notice what it had lost or what it had narrowly avoided. The corner of 7th Street and Maple reopened within 48 hours. Yellow tape came down. Chalk washed away with the next rain. A temporary memorial appeared for a night and vanished by morning, replaced by flyers for a missing dog and a handwritten sign advertising cheap repairs. No cart returned. No sign announced itself. The corner no longer waited for permission. Tony Blake died in the hospital 2 days later. There was no headline. No long-form coverage. A brief mention in the Metro section. Man succumbed to injuries following a late-night altercation. His name appeared once, misspelled, then was corrected online and forgotten. The people who had worked under him scattered efficiently. Some moved operations 3 blocks east. Others left town altogether. A few tried to fill the vacuum he left behind and discovered that power without structure was louder, uglier, and far more expensive. Violence spiked, then normalized. That was the city's version of healing. Detective Marcus Hale returned to work the next morning. He filed his report carefully, using language that closed doors rather than opening them. The facts were there, arranged in a way that discouraged curiosity. Self-defense. Credible threat. Witness corroboration. A woman with no prior record and a gun that was legally owned. The file passed review. No one asked Hale how he knew where to be that night. No one asked why he had not called for backup. The city preferred its heroes accidental, and its complicity invisible. Hale drove past the corner less often now. When he did, he barely recognized it. Without Miss June, the space had lost its restraint. Music blasted from cars stopped in the middle of the street. Arguments played out in public, unresolved and raw. Deals happened openly and clumsily. Guns appeared sooner. The corner had become what the city had always assumed it was. Unmanaged. Hale wondered how many lives would be lost before someone somewhere decided that order, any order, was preferable to chaos. He suspected the answer was more than anyone wanted to admit. Miss June never appeared in another report. Her name surfaced briefly during the investigation, then sank beneath more urgent concerns. Without a fixed address, without family pressing for explanations, she became a footnote in a closed case. Some said she left the city. Some said she stayed nearby, watching different streets, different corners. Some said she had never existed at all. Hale did not believe that. People like Miss June did not disappear. They dissolved. Weeks later, Hale found the seeds in his coat pocket. The bag had been there so long it felt like part of the lining. The plastic was creased, the contents stale. He poured a few into his palm and studied them. Small, ordinary, easily overlooked. He remembered the rhythm of her hands, the economy of her movements, the way the street had responded to gestures so slight they barely qualified as actions. Control, he realized, did not require force. It required attention. The corner taught that lesson to someone else eventually. Not immediately. Not cleanly. But patterns always re-emerged. A man began parking his food truck nearby at the same time every night. He sold tacos, cheap and fast. He did not say much. Did not involve himself. But people noticed that when he packed up early, things tended to go wrong. A woman started sweeping the sidewalk outside the liquor store every evening, long after the trash was gone. When she stopped sweeping, arguments escalated. The street learned again. It always did. Hale understood then that Miss June had not been unique. She had been early. She had seen what the city refused to acknowledge. That absence of authority did not mean freedom. It meant improvisation. And improvisation favored the reckless, not the careful. Miss June had imposed care where the city had imposed indifference. She had chosen who could operate and when, not out of greed or ambition, but out of a refusal to let randomness decide everything. That was not justice. But it was not nothing. On a cool evening months later, Hale stopped at a different corner, miles away. A small stand sold roasted nuts and bottled water. The man behind it barely looked up as Hale approached. His hands moved steadily, methodically, as if the pace itself mattered. Hale bought a bag. As he walked away, he noticed the street just around the stand, subtly, unconsciously. He did not turn back. Some systems did not need names. The corner of 7th and Maple remained louder than it had been. But not forever. Nothing stayed ungoverned for long. Someone always stepped into the gap, not with a badge or a gun, but with presence, with consistency, with the patience to watch and the discipline to act only when necessary. Miss June had understood that. She had paid the price for it. The city had accepted the benefit. Hale drove home that night through streets full of quiet compromises. He rolled down the window and let the city noise wash in, uneven and alive. For a moment, he imagined the soft click of a thermos lid, the pause that followed, the way the street used to listen. Then the light changed. Traffic moved. And the corner, like all corners, waited for whoever would claim it next.